I call to order Lake Havasu Metropolitan Planning Organization Executive Board meeting on Tuesday, September 12th, 2017 at 2 p.m. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Jeanette, would you call the roll, please?
Mark Nixon,
Here.
Buster Johnson,
Here.
Donna McCoy,
Here.
Deanna Beaver,
Here.
David Lang.
Here. Okay, item 4 on our agenda is our call to the public. Would anybody like to address this board as part of call to the public? Seeing none, we're going to move on to item 5, which is our consent agenda. First of all, would any of the board members like to remove any of the items for separate discussion? All right, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, may I make a motion?
Yes.
I move that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, we do have a motion and a second to accept the consent agenda as presented. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Item 6, announcements, communications, update reports. First, we'll have a presentation from ADOT regarding safety targets.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you for having me. My name is Kerry Wilcoxon with ADOT Traffic Safety. I have a short presentation I'll go into, and then we'll be open here for discussion. Thank you again for having me out here. It's the first time I've been to Lake Havasu in this area. It's a very nice city and a nice drive up, at least in parts, but it is a long drive. But I'm here today to talk to you about safety targets, which is something that is a new federal requirement from ADOT and from the regional planning organizations like yourself. We have been asked to submit targets for starting this year, and we'll probably do that every year going forward. As of about a week and a half ago, ADOT formalized our targets for 2018 for the state. And as I said, those will be updated every year, but they are what we're calling projections of where traffic safety will be in the state for the next 16 to 18 months. We are here, and we've been visiting all the different COGs and MPOs to provide a briefing on what ADOT has done and also provide guidance on what is required of the regional and local or regional councils. It is our hope that after this, Lake Havasu MPO adopts the ADOT targets, but you are also free to set your own targets, and we'll talk about that as we go. But first, I like to start every presentation that I give with just a note of where we are in traffic safety. We just finished 2016. Our data is now complete, and in 2016 was a bad year for traffic safety. We had about 3 people killed on our roads every day, or to put it in a more timely context, by the time I leave work tonight, there will likely have been 1 more fatality on the road. That's a 7% increase from the year before, and ever since the recession, traffic crashes, fatalities, and injuries have been going up. Also last year, we had 4,500 people seriously injured on our roads, which is about 1 every 2 hours. So for the length of this meeting, we'll have potentially 1 person seriously injured in a motor vehicle crash. And finally, we saw 126,000 crashes on our roads throughout Arizona, which is another 9% increase, which means that while I'm talking here, there will be about 5 to 6 crashes happening somewhere in Arizona. And right now, we're projecting that those trends are going to continue for 2017 and 18. One more plug before we get going. The data that I just quoted is available online at this website, the ADOT crash facts website. There's also a highlights format or an executive summary format that is available this year, and that will give you more specific breakdown on how crashes are happening, where they're happening, and who's involved. But back to the reason for my being here. The federal government has decided that they will force the states and municipal agencies to set safety targets, among other targets. They include bridge maintenance, pavement maintenance, things like that. But the one we're here to talk about today is the safety targets. They were set late last year, or the requirement was set late last year. And you can see they had over 11,000 comments on them. Most of them dealing with the word target, and we'll talk about that in a second as well. But if you look at what the actual requirements are, the state and the regional partners are responsible for setting targets in 5 areas: number of fatalities, either in the state or overall; fatality rate, in other words, the number of people who are killed per vehicle mile traveled; serious injuries, serious injury rate, and the number of pedestrians and bicyclists killed and injured over the year. The top 3 are also part of the Highway Safety Plan that is established by the Governor's Office of Highway Safety. And as I said, ADOT has established all targets for all 5 of these and has advertised them to the federal government. The federal government is still reviewing them, but we'll get to the targets in a second. The regional partners, though, have 6 months to either agree with ADOT on that they'll set or they'll adopt the ADOT targets, or they will set their own. And there are a couple things that need to be done independent of ADOT if you want to set your own. If you look at where we are today, if you look at the straight line or the curvy line here, this is actually the vehicle miles traveled as calculated by ADOT throughout the state. And you can see right here, this was where the recession occurred. It also happened to be where a lot of projections occurred. Because when this vehicle mile travel line broke, what we found is that crashes statewide and nationwide went down. And so people thought, hallelujah, we're at a tipping point. We're not going to see crashes like we saw before the recession anymore. But then we recovered from the recession, or are recovering from this recession, and our vehicle miles traveled continued to rise, and our crashes continued to go up. Right now, at this point in our history, crashes are largely the subject of, or largely coupled with the state of the economy. If the economy is doing well, people are driving more and their exposure to motor vehicle crashes goes up. If the economy is suffering, people drive less, there's less goods being shipped, so the exposure goes down and crashes go down. Right now, the economy going up, we're seeing more and more crashes, and we expect to see more this year. Here's a 5-year or 6-year histogram of crashes, or actually fatalities, throughout the state. You can kind of see some of the dynamics going, but more importantly, you can see where we are as far as the concept of where we want to be and where we believe we're going to be. And that's where the concept of goals versus projections comes in. Back in 2013 and 14, the state of Arizona, through its Strategic Highway Safety Plan, saw the trends and expected that there would be a 3 to 7% reduction in crashes, injuries, and deaths on our road going forward to at least to 2019. The Governor's Office of Highway Safety was a little more aggressive. They believed that they would see a 9% reduction for the same time period. But again, those were based on data within the recession when we felt that traffic crashes were going to plateau or go down. What we found since the recession, though, is that the crashes and fatalities have gone up. So what we're here with right now is we're looking at about a 4% increase in fatalities this year compared to last, and a 4% next year compared to this year. So as I mentioned earlier, we had 962 fatalities last year. We're actually expecting about 1,000 this year and about 1,040 next year. Now those are our projections if we do nothing, if we continue business as usual. It's important to recognize that that is not our goal. This is our goal, 3 to 7% reduction or the 9% reduction. Nobody wants this, but we know that that's where the crashes are headed. So it's important to realize when we're talking about targets, that when we talk about targets, we're really talking about projections. That's where we believe the data is showing us crashes are going to go. They are not what we want to do. They are not what we are setting for ourselves, and they are not what we hope that happens. But that's what the data is showing us. So we're doing everything we can to make sure that we do not hit these targets. So the targets actually, or the projections, come from looking at the big data from the state. And if you look at just the fatality crash, this is a histogram of the 10-year fatalities. These are the yearly fatality rates, and this is what's called the 5-year rolling average, which is basically the average of the last 5 years in the queue. If you were looking at a 10-year or the last 10 years, you would see that the target or the projections would show a decrease. And you can kind of draw the straight line, even though it's not been drawn here for you. You can kind of see a straight line, and it's pointing down in the right direction. That's because we started at a very high point. We had over 1,300 fatalities in 2006. And after the recession hit, they dropped to a low in 2010, but now they're on their way up. But if you look at a 10-year period, we're looking at a decrease. If you shorten the time frame to 5-year period, we're actually starting to see an increase. As we come out of the recession, more and more years of post-recession driving, you can start to see crashes going up, and you start to see an increase. But if you look at the last 3 years, since 2014, we're actually seeing about a 3.5% increase or projection for the next few years, at least until we can figure out how to decouple driving safety or traffic safety from the economy. So all of this leads to our targets. When we set our targets or projections for 2018, we were looking at the 3-year trends and projecting that by 2018, we would actually see 1,040 deaths, and that's the number we're going to be reporting to FHWA. Actually, that is the number we reported to FHWA, reflecting a 4% increase and a 5-year rolling average of about 935 deaths. The second target, the fatality rate, we're also seeing increase. We're expecting 1.42 crashes per 100 million vehicle miles, about a 2% increase. And that is the number we're going to be projecting, or that is that number we have reported to FHWA. For serious injuries, we're actually expecting to see no change at all. The numbers look like they will be neutral, but still at 4,500 serious injuries in a given year, or a 5-year rolling average of 4,330 serious injuries. And then finally, second to the last, the serious injury rate we actually expect to go down. The combination of the fact that the serious injuries are staying neutral and the traffic volume is increasing means that we expect that rate to actually go down. So we're actually expecting a 6.5 serious injuries per 100 million vehicle miles traveled, and a 5-year average of 6.5 per 100 million vehicle miles. And then the last one, pedestrian and bicycle fatalities and serious injuries. Most of you know that Arizona is a focus state for pedestrian and bicycle safety. We have a lot of people hit on our roads who are either biking or walking, and those trends we expect to continue. We're expecting a 2% increase this year, and next with a 2018 number of 808 and nearly 890 fatal or serious injury pedestrian and bicycle crashes statewide, with a 5-year rolling average of 790 fatalities and serious injuries. So these are the numbers we are projected. We've provided to FHWA, the increases, the neutral, the decreases, and again the increase. These three numbers, the percentage increase, the actual absolute number, and the 5-year average, have all been reported, and those are based on projections. They are not based on our goals. They are not based on what we want to have happen, but we know that those are a likely outcome at this point. Now, as I said, the MPOs and COGs are also required to report targets for the FHWA, or to FHWA, within 6 months of the August 31st deadline that we just passed. There are two ways to go. You can either agree with the ADOT projections and just send us a letter to that effect, or you can set your own. If you set your own, they have to be based on something, and they have to be based on the data that we would provide you, which would be the fatality, serious injury, and pedestrian and bicycle fatality, serious injury numbers that you see there, and also some idea of the vehicle miles traveled. Now, that's a tough thing to get on a regional area. Even MAG has trouble reading that or finding that information. But you're welcome to do that if you so desire. If you're going to use these projections, our data, even though the lines look like they're going in a definitive direction, there's a lot of noise in the data. The numbers are very small, and they vary quite a bit from year in and year out. You only need to look at the fatality numbers in 2015 versus 16 versus 14 to see the effects of that. But if you are going to project or provide targets, we would recommend that you just say that the targets are going to be neutral or inconclusive, or that you use the ADOT targets. If you go the route of setting your own targets, you must provide a VMT, vehicle miles traveled estimate, which your planning organization or your planning department may be able to provide you. There are many ways to do that. It's a lot of work, and you have to then report to FHWA on I believe it's a quarterly basis, how you're doing with your targets, just like ADOT is going to be doing. But as I mentioned, we recommend that you adopt the ADOT targets. If you choose to do so, and actually regardless of whether you choose to do so or not, we would support your decision. But if you choose to adopt the targets, we do have a sort of a standard wording on a letter that you would need to generate and send to us. You'd have to approve it, of course, but you would have 6 months to come up with those targets, whether you're adopting ours or coming up with your own. And with that, I'd be more than happy to take any questions.
Well, I guess my first one is, why is this important to us? So we set targets. I didn't see any. Does the Fed pay for a reduction in targets? Do they penalize if you don't meet the targets? In other words, why is this important to us?
That's an excellent question, and it's important to you for two reasons. First of all, to answer your last question, there is a penalty to ADOT if we don't meet our targets or make substantial progress to our targets. We would have to spend more safety money on safety projects. Now, we are already overspending that, so that's not much of a target. There's more paperwork we would have to do, but there's a penalty that we would pay. The locals, the regionals have no penalty other than if you go your own route, if you do your own targets, you would have to then pay someone to keep track of them.
Right.
There's no financial penalty to them, and there's really no reason other than personal desire to do that. So there's really no reason to set your own targets unless you want to. The one caveat that I would mention, though, and we discussed this with all the MPOs and COGs that we've talked to today, the state safety targets are they're not great. Nobody wants to be the person saying, you know what, I believe that my agency is comfortable with the fact that we're going to kill 4% more people on the roads this year and 4% more than that next year. No one wants to take that public relations hit. Now, ADOT has chosen to because we believe that the math is correct, and we believe that's the way to go. Plus, we know that that's not what we're actually shooting for. That's just what the projections are based on. But there is a potential downside to adopting even our targets, just with a negative press. But they are statewide, so the argument could be made that, you know, Lake Havasu MPO is not the state of Arizona.
But the government's saying, the federal government's saying, we want you to put together some safety targets.
That's correct.
Do they attach dollars to achieving those, or do they just say, here you go, we want you to go out there and reduce traffic accidents, but we're not going to help you do it?
I wish they were attaching dollars to it. They are not.
Yeah, see, that's
we get the same amount.
That's
no
an
matter
unfunded mandate that I just have real problems with. But all right.
Yes, there are federal dollars that come to the state no matter what. If we don't make our targets, we have to spend more of them. But as I said, we're already overspending anyway. So the target financially to the state isn't real. The target financially to the MPOs and COGs doesn't exist.
Right. Okay.
Chairman, it seems like this is an exercise of gathering data, one, but two, if you're saying that from the federal level to the state level, there would be a penalty, but down to the local level, there isn't. So if, say, a local entity such as ourselves chose to just ignore it all, does that affect the federal dollars that we would get down the road if we don't either set our own or adopt the ADOT?
It wouldn't affect your the federal dollars that are available to you, but you are required to set your own, or to set targets. And as I said, so far, most MPOs and COGs that we've spoken to are adopting ADOTs just because of the data burden. But you have to set some targets. But whether you set your own or adopt ADOTs is up to you.
Because they're the government.
Certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a couple questions on your presentation.
Sure.
How do we compare with other states?
It's a great question. Arizona, we actually do quite a bit of peer exchange throughout the year. Arizona is not only high from a fatality standpoint and serious injury standpoint from most other states. We are up with Texas, California, Florida, those states, but we're well below there. We are one of the states that are showing increasing trends for all of these categories, fatality and serious injuries. Smaller states, Delaware, Connecticut, they're actually declining or showing declines. Florida, Texas, California, they're showing increases. To give you some comparison, California and Florida both saw over, actually, California and Florida, I believe, both saw over 3,000 fatalities last year. So we're about a third of them. But they are also increasing, and they're struggling with the same, or they were struggling with the same decision that ADOT had to make. Do we give something that shows an increase, or do we set a target that's closer to our goal, knowing that we're probably going to fail?
But if California is 3,000 and we're over 1,000, wouldn't that make us about even, since they're a lot larger in population and must have a ton more vehicle miles?
Yeah, I haven't seen the numbers on vehicle miles traveled or exposure data, but it would, we're about a third of the size of California, I think, and we're about a third of the fatalities.
How does our region compare to the rest of the state?
Your region is very low compared to the rest of the state. The numbers, as I mentioned, the numbers that we're seeing from this area fall into the, and not to downplay the seriousness of any individual crash, but they fall into the sort of the background noise of traffic crashes. When I look at traffic crashes throughout the state, the Lake Havasu MPO area is not an area that we say, there's a problem here.
Okay, what about, is there a relationship between visitors and residents as far as fatalities go? Or is it pretty much residents mostly?
Well, we haven't seen, I mean, we haven't looked at that. I'd be surprised if there wasn't. For instance, ASU in Tempe, where I'm from, there is a definite uptick in bicycle pedestrian crashes during the school year. Scottsdale, where I live, there is a definite uptick in older drivers being hit during the the winter season when they're there. So it wouldn't surprise me. We just haven't looked at the data from the Lake Havasu MPO.
Are the increases in line with population or tourism growth?
They don't seem to be as directly connected with population as they do with vehicle miles traveled. The state was increasing in population, although not as rapidly during the recession, and yet we were seeing a decline in crashes. It was only when vehicle miles traveled came back that we started seeing the uptick in crashes.
Thank you, that's all I had, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if I may. So the MDR, the mileage death rate, if I'm looking at the slides real quick, 1.4, which is actually quite high.
Yes.
To answer Mr. Johnson's question, California during the recession was 0.8. So it's gone up quite a bit. And
Yeah.
are there plans in place to bring it down? What is the overall, you have education, enforcement, engineering. What kind of plans do we have to try to bring this down? And to the chairman's point, the education and the enforcement part and the education part, our engineering part, all cost money.
Absolutely.
And is any of that money going to filter this way, especially for enforcement?
That's a great question, and it actually cuts to the heart of my job. As I mentioned, right now, crashes, injuries, and deaths on our roads are really tied to the health of the economy. In that respect, in a lot of respects, it doesn't matter what we do. The economy is growing, so the crashes are going up. We are trying to decouple crashes from the economy. And that's hard for a couple of reasons. One is just the sheer fact of exposure. You have a finite number of roads, finite width, finite length, and you got more and more drivers out on there. But the other thing that makes it tough from any one of those three E's you mentioned is that statistically 90 to 95% of all crashes are the result of driver error. And so it's very difficult to engineer, educate, or enforce your way out of those kinds of things. The state of Arizona gets about $40 to $43 million every year for engineering-related safety programs. In addition, through the Governor's Office of Highway Safety, we get about $5 million every year that goes primarily towards education and enforcement. And they use that every year to get more DUI task forces out, to get bike helmet programs, driver awareness programs, pay for overtime for police officers. So they're trying to do as much as they can with the money they have. But it's very difficult. Before I was with ADOT, I came from the city of Phoenix. And every year we would get a certain amount of money for extra enforcement. And that would pay for overtime. It wouldn't pay for extra police officers. So what we were ending up with the situation is we had a lot of money that we could give to the police for, let's say, DUI or bicycle safety or whatever. They just didn't have the officers. So it didn't matter how much money we had. There was kind of a bottleneck there, which they just couldn't get the number of officers. So there were bottlenecks like that throughout the system. With education, we run into the problem that you end up with, with getting your driver's license every 20 years or so, whatever it is in Arizona. You don't actually have to look at a driver's manual but once, in most people's lifetime. So it's hard to reach the audience. But frankly, and I guess the other E in that equation, the roads we build, the signage, the speed limits we set, they're not unsafe. We don't have a lot of crashes each year that are solely the result of a bad roadway design or an improperly set speed limit or a curve that's too sharp. We just don't have it because we put a lot of thought and effort into that. So the money that we get for enforcement, education, and engineering is really trying to address that 5 to 10% that falls outside of human behavior. What is likely to be the tipping point, if we can't figure out some way to control the tiger by the tail, what is likely to be the tipping point will be when we start to see more autonomous vehicles and driverless cars on the road doing things or removing the driver from the equation. You're starting to see that now a little bit, but it hasn't hit. It probably won't for another 10 years. But that's probably where you'll actually see the true decoupling of the crashes to the exposure.
Are there any studies that have been done on the fact that our roadways are not being kept up as well as they should be because of funding and the infrastructure, where some of that has to do with contributing to the severity of the injuries of these collisions?
There have been. There's quite a bit, actually. The studies that the safety studies end up with two very different conclusions. Typically, the conclusions are that having a bad road, a bumpy, pot-marked road, causes people to drive slower. And if you drive slower, the chances that you're going to be involved in a crash go down, the severity of the crash goes down. So they actually have a negative or a positive effect. Having bad roads is a positive effect. And again, from my experience in Phoenix, I know that whenever we came and repaved a road, the first thing that we would see is speeds go up. But the other part of that, of course, is that bad roads can lead to mistakes by drivers. They also complicate first response. They complicate alternatives, and they tend to funnel traffic sometimes where you don't want them to. So there are two sides to it. But typically, from a real-time safety standpoint, the biggest effect of having bad roads is lower crashes. That is not ADOT's position. We are spending money and putting a lot of money every year into making the roads that we have better and to designing new roads. But typically, the rougher the road, the slower people drive.
If you use that theory, we might as well have dirt roads.
Pardon me?
If you want to go down that theory, you might as well just have dirt roads. Everyone will drive slower. But
That is correct.
I don't think that's the goal.
And that is, by the way, for anyone listening, that is not the position of ADOT. It's not where we're going.
Do you offhand, by chance, know what the mileage death rate is for this region?
I don't, primarily because we don't have a VMT for the Lake Havasu
Sure.
MPO. If you wanted to go that route, if you wanted to set your own targets, we would have to work with your planning organization or your planning department to try and come up with something for you. But it would have to be something that we gather from local data.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, I had a question. If, say, for instance, to start with, the MPO wanted to adopt the ADOT targets, and later they wanted to switch, is there that possibility?
There is. We have to set targets every year, and so will the MPOs and COGs. So in 2018, we'll have another set of targets based on the 2017 data, and you'll have 6 months after August 31st to either agree with us or set your own targets. So you can go either way, and you'll be able to see the data as it moves along the line.
Mr. Chairman? Sorry. Okay, so we're going to set these targets, whether we set them or you set them, and then we have these targets, and then what happens with these targets? Do they penalize us if we don't bring the targets down, or do they penalize us if we say, okay, we've got targets, so, life goes on as it's
Sure.
done, or, I'm confused.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
And this is this is probably a confusing topic. I've gone to many presentations on this up to this point, and every time someone from FHWA tries to explain it, it is usually people are left with more questions. So I'm going to try and give you the benefit of all that I've heard.
Okay.
But first of all, you have to set targets as an MPO, whether they be adopting the states or coming up with your own. You just have to do it within 6 months. But if you, the MPO, don't meet your targets, crashes come in way above what you expected, which is very likely with your numbers, there is no penalty. We would look at your targets and we would say, gee, what happened? And we would have the data, so we would know that, hell, you had, I think one year you had no fatalities. If you have 2 fatalities that year or next year, it's a huge increase. We're going to say that's noise. I mean, those are tragic events, but that is not something that you really can predict very well. So we would say, okay, this is what happened, and you can use it to inform your next targets, or again, you can adopt the ADOT targets. But there'd be no financial penalty. The only financial penalty, if there is one, would be levied against the state. And it's really not a financial penalty, a bad financial penalty from our standpoint. If we don't meet our targets, our projections, and as I said, most of them are going up, then we will be forced by FHWA to spend, I believe it's 10 or 20% more on safety projects than we did in 2017. Now, we're already spending that much more, so there's no real impact that the penalty would have, but even if there was, it's kind of a good penalty because we just have to put more money into safety projects. Now, if we don't make our targets, there are some more paperwork that we have to fill out and things like that. But as far as the state goes, the most that we would see is we would have to pull money from other federal pots to fund safety. The most you all would see is you would see more dollars available to you for highway safety improvement programs, things like that.
Okay, so we have your assurance that we'll get more money, not that the state is going to come and take more money because we haven't met our target.
Yes, you have my assurance, but probably more comforting, you have the federal government's assurance, if that's assurance. No, you also have ADOT's assurance. Yeah, we won't, whatever targets you end up setting, if you don't make them, the only thing it'll do to you is, if you set your own targets, it just means you have that much more paperwork to do. But whether you make them or not, it doesn't really have an impact on whether or not the money is there. What will make an impact is whether or not the projects that you apply for, and you're applying for at least one right now, compete well with other locations throughout the state. As far as does it benefit, is there enough public benefit for that project? Has nothing to do with these targets.
Sharon, I have more of a comment than anything. What I see is a maddening cycle starting, because when you have to have targets and then you have to meet your targets, and then the state has had lawsuits, which you're probably aware of, and every time you up that safety threshold, then the liability kicks in, because the expectation is you better keep all of the drivers on the road safe, and bikers and everyone safe. And so to me, it's like, if we aren't meeting these, then someone has a capability of suing, say, the city or the state, because they knew that there were those targets and we didn't meet them, and so you've done something wrong, so lawsuit. I just see this maddening cycle in my mind happening over this. But like I said, it was more of a comment than anything. So thank you.
What do you need from us today?
Well, today I don't necessarily need anything.
Okay.
Eventually, though, we are going to need a decision by the board whether you want to adopt your own targets or whether you want to adopt ADOT's targets. Whatever you do, we just need something in writing saying what you want to do by, what would that be, March or April of next year?
Okay.
6 months after August 31st.
Chairman, I have it set for the November meeting after the
Okay.
TAC reviews the letter. I've written the letter already from his sample, and it'll be going to the TAC on the 19th.
Okay, perfect.
Of October? September?
Any final questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, is there a district update report? No. And how about a TAC report?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. TAC Committee Chair Stuart Schmaling, for the record. In August 15th, we met with AMAC Foster Wheeler, our consultant for the bike and pedestrian plan. We had our kickoff meeting. We had 17 people in attendance at that meeting. The first public meeting is scheduled for September 19th at 6 p.m. in this room. And if you haven't opened an email in a couple of months, we have successfully completed our recruitment process. The individual that we offered the MPO manager job to did accept the position, and he is scheduled to begin October 9th, I believe. And that's all I have.
All right, thank you very much. And is there an MPO update? Okay.
I passed out a letter to you guys, and what it states is that our consultant on our bicycle pedestrian implementation plan, the two main people that we depend on, have ventured out onto their own company. But we've been assured by AMAC they're going to subcontract with Mike Blankenship and Scott Kelly with the new company, and AMAC will be handling our contract, and there will be no change in any of our players on this contract. So it will go forward. I just wanted to make you guys aware of this. And I did ask them for a letter for the file.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the public hearings portion of our agenda. Item 7.1, discussion and possible action to approve a resolution to encourage the Arizona Department of Transportation to seek alternate funding sources for the Interstate 15 transportation roadway improvements. Mr. Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the board, Chris Bridges, I'm the director for Central Yavapai MPO. I do have an opening for a transportation planner, apparently. Since
Yes, you do.
Mr. Gallegos has accepted your generous offer. So spread the word. So I'm here today to talk about the Interstate 15 and the resolution. CYMPO board did adopt this resolution, and as well did the Sun Corridor MPO, and others are considering as well if they haven't already. This resolution essentially encourages ADOT to pursue all modes or methods to fund Interstate 15. I got 17 on the brain because all the crashes. Interstate 15, if you're not familiar, runs through just the northwest corner of Arizona. It doesn't really truly serve much of Arizona residents. There's very few people that live up in that region, and the concern is that ADOT is responsible for maintaining that portion of Interstate 15. And the impact that we are going to see of that is based on the Casa Grande Accords, which divvied up the spending across the state between MAG, Maricopa Association of Governments, Pima Association of Governments, PAG, and then Greater Arizona, which is the 13 other counties outside of those two regions. Basically divides up that we get 50% as Greater Arizona, MAG and PAG get the other 50%. The funding for these projects on Interstate 15 for maintenance would come out of the Greater Arizona portion. It's a significant chunk. The last bridge that was done on there, I believe, was about $30 million. There are 6 more bridges to replace on there. They're substandard. I believe Director Halikowski said at our Payson meeting that they're 2 girder bridges. And I'm not an engineer and I'm no expert, but they build them with 5 now. You lose a girder, you're going to lose the whole bridge. This is a significant freight corridor that connects specifically California to Las Vegas and Salt Lake City. And but none of those states actually pay to maintain this. It's Arizona's burden. So the concern is that the maintenance of those structures would come out of the Greater Arizona pot, therefore impacting Lake Havasu, Prescott, Flagstaff, we're going to end up paying for those things when our residents really truly don't utilize that roadway. And that's what our resolution is intended to do. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be tolling. It could be grants. It could be other funding sources. ADOT has talked with Nevada and Utah about potentially chipping in on this, and they've not been interested. And why should they? Arizona is the one required to do it. So this resolution is just to encourage ADOT to constantly look for other funding sources. They have obtained a Tiger grant in the past for the bridge that they just did. And to continue to apply for Tiger grants or infra, which is another pot of money that's out there to fund these things so that Greater Arizona is basically held harmless. I know that in our resolution that the SIMPO board passed, it does say tolling, but I believe Flagstaff took out the tolling word. It doesn't matter. Alternative funding sources are alternative funding sources. So whatever makes you comfortable, if you do choose to adopt this resolution, please do so, because it does help out the rest of the state. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
I have a question.
Certainly.
There's work going on bridges up there now, or in the future coming up pretty quickly. You leave out the fact that for me to get to the northern part of my county, I have to travel that road to get up.
Yes,
there.
you do.
I believe the state of Arizona receives quite a bit of dollars from that road. The way we pay for it, obviously, that's been in our in our state forever. It has been our responsibility, and while greater area might not want to pay for it, I believe it contributes tremendously to the state of Arizona and to us. I have no problem, and I'm sure that ADOT looks at all funding sources, but I would be adamantly opposed to any tolling on a federal highway. It would to shut down all commerce.
And to the tolling issue, Supervisor, that Director Halakowski did let the State Transportation Board know that tolling on existing facilities is not allowed.
Yeah.
Right? It's new capacity. So if they were at a lane, you could do that. But bridge structures are exempt from that rule. Bridge structures can be tolled. And this is actually done in other parts of the country, and it's not tolling the private citizens that are doing it. It's actually a negotiated rate with the trucking company. So the statewide and national trucking associations get involved, and then they negotiate some rate because it is in the interest of the trucking companies to make sure that the bridges over the I-15 or any other structure aren't going to fall down, and that they can maintain. If we did lose one of those structures, I believe the alternate route is somewhere like 480 miles to get around, and it would take you up and through Nevada and Utah. So I definitely understand your concern on the tolling, but just to let you know what we did here a couple board meetings ago.
Right. Well, and they've tried this in the past to try to float tolling out there on the I-15, and I think the state, they get revenue money from her. We do have gas stations and things up there to collect the revenue. Just because the state can't balance their budget doesn't mean they should come over to our county. And I have no problem with them looking at other ways to fund it, but I would adamantly oppose, like I said, to any kind of tolling.
In that vein, I don't know how tolling gets you to solve the problem anyway. I mean, think about what they would have to charge the trucking companies to get even close.
Right.
And then what happens with that money? It gets tacked on to the cost of goods and services that they deliver. So in effect, we all pay for it. My biggest concern here, and I've expressed it before, is that, and I certainly understand that we're under a formula, and that whatever this area gets, that means the other rural areas doesn't get, but that's another way of pitting one rural area against another, and that really kind of, I mean, why don't they try the tolling in the middle of Phoenix and Tucson? Wouldn't they get a hell of a lot more money?
That makes a lot of sense. In fact, the South Mountain Loop 202 that's being constructed now, that idea was tossed out. That, I mean, it would actually be an ideal toll road situation, but Maricopa Association of Governments, or the residents of the region voted on a tax that has a certain dollar amount that is for that roadway, and because it was voter approved, they decided to go ahead and still pay for that with that voter approved money rather than go in a public-private partnership and raising the money to pay for that road for itself. So, and you're right. I mean, you're talking 30 million a bridge, 6 more to go. I'm no math major, but that's $180 million. It's a lot of money.
That's a lot of toll.
Yes.
Well, I guess the question for the board today is, one, do you want to issue a letter at all? And two, what would it look like?
Chairman, I just want to go on record as because of the dual role I sit on both here on the MPO and also on the State Transportation Board, it has been highly suggested to me that I abstain from discussion or voting. So even though I'm somebody who shares my opinions liberally one way or the other, I'm going to abstain. So that will be the last word on this you hear from me today.
Chairman,
Yes.
if you would look, I gave you guys an example of the Sun Corridor one, which was the original resolution that we went with. And I also gave you a copy of Waycock's resolution. In Waycock's resolution, they did take out the word tolling. So if you want to approve this with noted changes, we can change this resolution.
Mr. Chair. Myself personally, I'm adamantly opposed against toll roads. They already pay gasoline taxes, we pay registration fees, we pay all kinds of fees to maintain the road. So toll roads, I think, should be totally out of it. As far as the resolution goes, alternate sources of funding and the best bang for your buck for taxpayer dollars should always be the way we do things anyway. So I don't have a problem with the resolution stating that, take out any toll roads.
Well, and I guess to me, the question is, do you not only just take out tolling, but you say excluding tolling? Because in other words, alternative funding sources includes tolling.
Correct.
So do you say alternative funding sources exclusive of tolling? Because otherwise, they go, oh, thanks.
Yeah, I would agree with that, exclusive of tolling, because the people, it's just another tax, and there's no reason that they should have to pay that, especially what guarantee do we have that, okay, they're gonna toll these roads and then sweep those funds for something else anyway?
True. Would that be okay with
That'd
you?
be okay with me.
Okay, so it sounds like the direction is we'll go ahead and do a resolution, but we want to make it clear after alternative funding sources that it's not to include tolling. So
Okay, I
maybe,
can fix it.
Right. Mr. Chairman, I could make a motion to include those recommendations and have the chairman sign them at a later date when they're done.
I'll second that.
all right, we do have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Okay,
Thank you.
thanks, Chris. Okay. 7.2, discussion and possible action to approve the lease agreement between Lake Havasu City and Lake Havasu MPO. Jeanette, you want to explain why we need a new, we move space?
Yeah. So with our original lease, it was really designated the offices that the MPO had. So when we moved the space to the back of the building where they made the 2 new offices, we actually increased our space. So with the increased space, we can up the actual in-kind amount every month that we're taking for the rent. And we did not originally, in the original lease, have the shared color copier because we just got that. And we didn't put in the janitorial services or the ground maintenance in the original lease. So with this, I would like you guys to approve the lease. It is also going to City Council tonight.
Okay,
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the lease as presented.
Second.
Okay, we do have a motion and a second. Any final discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Okay, 7.3, discussion and possible actions, the Lake Havasu MPO to pursue 5305 grant for a 5307 transit plan for Havasu mobility. Jeanette.
What we're looking at is there is a grant opportunity right now. It just came out. It opened today, and it closes on October 26th. And what that grant is for transit planning. So what we're looking at is we're going to ask for a transit implementation plan to find out if we can utilize the 5307 money. The 5307 money for Lake Havasu City is $776,000. I know the match is high, but I've also talked to Sarah Allred with the ADOT FTA section, and she explained to me that also we can look for partners to help with that match, for the city's match on that funding, like ASU, the hospital, other people in the area that would want to utilize a public transit system. So what this is it's just we're asking for the permission to go apply for the grant. The grant's going to run $100,000 to $140,000. I've already talked to Tabitha Miller, the finance director, and she said we could make the match. And what this will do is it'll give us a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, and a 20-year plan. And then we'll also ask in the scope of work for them to look for partners to help us pay that match when we get that kind of funding. The also other thing is this is in vision of the 2020 plan. We want to develop a transit system that's small and can grow. So what the scope probably will look at is we start in the downtown area and encompass out as we increase the ridership. Our ridership right now is running 60 a day. It went up from 40 before we increased the hours. And this is just to our veterans, senior citizens, low income, and disabled. So if we expand this outreach, I think it'd be a good plan. We can't use the money unless we have a plan. So it won't hurt to do the plan. And we're talking 2 years down the road. We're not going to open transit full blown in the next year. The plan's going to take at least a year to a year and a half. And then, so we're looking at 2021 before we would even be ready to even think about it.
But under this sort of transit plan, can it still be curb to curb?
Yeah, what they'll do is they'll look at different ways. They'll give us different options. The plan's going to give us different options on how to do.
I've had a chance to talk to Patrick, the transit supervisor, about this.
Good.
And I think if you look back on the cycle of transit in Lake Havasu City, we were very early to the game. We were in demand response for 30 years. It got to the point where we had a huge demand response system, 140,000 trips a year. That wasn't sustainable.
Right.
Through some of the transit funding issues that happened with the state, we lost LTAF, we lost LTAF 2, we lost some of the other fundings that
We went over 50,000.
all of those things happen. And so Gary had done a great job of transitioning to the first fixed route. And that was really probably the only thing that Lake Havasu City transit users were going to accept. I don't think they would have accepted at that time a significant drop in service. But now that we've gone through that whole cycle and we've basically dropped back to beginning, I think it gives us the opportunity to really be innovative and try some new and interesting things, including, there may be fixed route components that are that are very short, in response. At the time that we implemented fixed route here the first time, there were 4 routes. They covered all the way from South Tacoma to the Highlands and Desert Hills. And so we had a very expansive program. And I think we now can look at it and say, we can't do everything for everyone, and we'll try things. And as an example, one of the things that Gary's kind of been talking to, Patrick's been talking to some of the shopping center is, would you be willing to support 1 day a week a bus out to this location? And then we got to thinking, well, maybe if you went out with an early bus and then an hour later went out with a second bus, but then that bus was picking up the people at Walmart that only had about an hour's worth of shopping, and then by the time you send the third one out to pick up, you know, either the people that have been there 3 hours and the people that have only been there 2 hours. I think there's a lot of opportunities for doing very incremental, custom fit locations. And so how I see this process going through is we are much better educated as managers of the consultants to say, you know, a cookie cutter, you know, throwing down 6 routes and all kinds of things isn't going to work here. We really do have to focus on employment centers, residency centers. And then I think our demographics have changed. The addition of ASU, the addition of the downtown corridor, where you actually could say, you know what, if public transit is going to be your idea of what you want, then you're going to probably have to be located within this 1 mile corridor in the downtown area where the apartments are within walking distance of a possible route, and that route may be every 30 to 40 minutes. Because if you think about where we were at, what we tried to do was have a very cityfied route with a lot of density, and it just didn't work here. So I think that giving the opportunity a couple years to go through the process and be prepared for knowing that we won't be able to do a very expansive route. It may be very limited. It may be, you know, from the bridge area up to the city hall, and that may be a corridor with occasional routes to other locations. Because when you think about it, that covers city hall, that covers the hospital, that covers the downtown areas, and that may be it. And then look for partnerships for, you know, occasional routes out to the shopping mall or wherever that's at. So I think that they're looking at the system as a, hey, we recognize funding's not going to just drop a bunch of money into our place, and we're going to have to look at incremental stuff.
Well, my concern, as you've kind of stated, is we had this fixed route system that we ended up out of our general fund spending over $800,000 a year for 300 regular riders. That was it. 300 regular riders. And so we said, okay, we're done with that. We don't want any of the government's funding. We'll drop back. We'll do curb to curb. And we started with Monday through Thursday, 8 to 2. Now we're at Monday through Friday, which I think is great, 8 to 5. And while we say it's really for seniors, veterans, disabled, and low income, actually we'll pick up anybody. I mean, we don't have any income verification. We don't do it.
I think somebody's
Patrick's been doing
yeah,
it.
there's been some income, but again, and I think.
But the fact is,
Right.
if somebody called and said, I really need it, we would go pick them up. And so we've been able to do that and get everybody happy for about $400,000 to $500,000 out of the general. So that's my concern. We go back to the federal government, and then now this thing balloons, and we're back to 800,000, $1 million for this fixed route system that is in this town doesn't work because it takes you 10 minutes to walk to any fixed bus station. It takes another 10 to 15 for the bus to get there. And it only takes 10 minutes in a car to get anywhere in town. So why in the hell would anybody, except somebody who doesn't have a car, use it? It's not convenient.
Well, and I think that's really what the study and the component and the process is about, because I think what it is identifying that group of demographics that don't have a car available or may not be able to use a car. And I think you really do look at the change in the demographics of that downtown corridor. I'm amazed at the amount of people that are walking in that downtown corridor, and for example, from the hotels along London Bridge Road, just about the mile north of the Channel area. So in other words, there are people that are using bicycling and walking as a mode of transportation. And again, the study, I think, would recognize, and we would be asking the questions of, we don't think that a fixed route classic system is the answer. We think that may be a component or a small part of the answer. And what you may find out is that you only use the federal dollars for that small component of it. You may still have direct dollars that you say, you know what, I want to do a once a week trip to Walmart, or I want to do a once a month thing. For example, one of the options that you would have is say, here's my fixed route for whatever limited length that is, but once a month I have a free transit day, if you will, where there are no restrictions. It's just we provide transit for that one day, curb to curb service. So I think that's really what the study would be talking about. Are there any innovative opportunities? One of the things that I don't think we've ever explored would be how do you interact with the private taxi companies and how do you make them a part of whatever system that is? And so I think
We tried that doesn't work.
well, I think we tried.
Because they don't want to do background checks.
I think we tried that as a specific substitution for the our service and a subsidy. I don't think that we will ever go down that road again, but I think what we would do is recognize that they do serve a transportation function that can be the one that takes them from everywhere else to that local area.
And they probably do now. I think my point is, for us to be able to cover them, or from a liability standpoint, we tried to do all that. We said, you absolutely have to do background checks on your drivers, and they said, no, thank you. Don't want to do that.
I have a question with regard to that. Is there like Uber up here? Has
Yes.
it reached out to Lake Havasu yet, or is it,
Uber's here.
We have Uber, and
I
there's
mean-
exactly 8.
and do they even do background checks?
I don't know how
You'd have
Uber
to ask
works.
Just a
Corp.
thought.
I think Uber does, but
They
I
do?
don't know for sure.
Okay.
So who pays for this study?
FTA. We're just paying the match.
And the match is
And the
how
match,
much?
we should be able, it should be about 20,000. And we should be able to do a lot of that within kind because it's going to be a very public involved plan.
Okay.
And the MPO is willing to put in, we can put 20,000 towards it.
Heather?
So this grant is just to complete the study, not,
And yes, it's just to do the study. We're never going to be able to take our 5307 funding that has been offered to us every year that we turn down
Right.
until
Without a
we
study.
have a plan. They won't even talk to us about it. So you have to have a plan to even think about taking funding that's already available to Lake Havasu City.
okay, thank you.
Well, I guess, and then it's up to the board, but I guess I don't mind doing the plan, but boy, we got to do it in conjunction with the city itself, because I've seen the disaster it had become over the last 10 years.
Yeah, we don't want to go backwards. We want to go
don't wanna
forwards.
backwards.
If they're willing to give us a grant to do the study that we can take forward to the city on whether or not we can implement a plan and it would be cost feasible, well, then I don't see a problem, but
Right.
it's the,
I don't disagree.
so I guess with that, we'd motion to approve you applying for the grant, because we don't even know if we're gonna get the grant. So it's just giving you permission to apply for the grant. So for that, I would say yes, and would make a motion to allow her to apply for the grant.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any final discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Okay, item 7.4, by the way, just so everybody knows, this is only if necessary. If for some reason you feel you need to get legal advice on the contract for the new MPO manager. My gut tells me we don't need it, but somebody else may feel differently, so.
I don't know, are we there yet? I did want to, there was also, where we could go into executive session just for discussion.
Well, it's to get, the contract's there, so unless you need legal advice on that contract, there's no reason to go into e-session.
Well, I thought there was 2 executive sessions available under this. Am I,
Discussion of the employment contract,
okay.
but we can do that in public, it's allowed, it's a public document. It's more if you need legal advice. If you want.
Okay, well, there's 2 separate ones, and I don't necessarily need legal advice, but I did want to make an inquiry with regard to the contract.
Go for it.
At the time that this has been done, this board has not been included in that process, so I wanted to know what went into coming up with the end result that we had.
The contract should be, did you read it?
I agree with that, but
It was based on what the direction you were there that we gave.
Okay, so
We gave
you're getting to my
direction.
point where I wanted to go into executive session. I just, I had a couple of questions that I wanted to discuss with regard to the contract.
You don't have to go into e-session if you don't want to, unless you need legal advice.
Okay, there is, as I understand, the opportunity to go into executive session for ARS 38431A1 and then also ARS 38431A3.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the second one is the one that I'm interested in. So are we just addressing the first one right now?
I'm a little lost as to what your questions are. If
seven
you have a
point-
question on the contract, ask it.
Okay, right here it says, if necessary, vote to adjourn to executive session
Right.
under ARS 431.03A. Okay, the part that I'm interested in is making a motion to go into executive session for ARS 38431A1. Am I looking at something different from
No.
everybody else?
No, but I don't understand what, and maybe Kelly, could you help us out here? Because we're not going to be discussing employment. He's been made the offer. We're not discussing a promotion, a demotion, a dismissal, salary, disciplining, or resigning of the public officer.
Okay,
So-
so salaries would probably be the key word.
Okay,
I guess if there's some confusion about what was drafted in the agreement and the board wants to go back up and have some discussion about that. I wasn't at the meeting where you had your discussion, so.
and this is a contract that's already been agreed to by the recipient.
Do you mind if I just talk with you for a minute? Or,
Yeah, I mean, you can vote to adjourn to a recess if we need a brief recess.
okay, I would like to make a motion, we adjourn for a brief recess. I'll just,
I'm gonna need a second.
I guess the only question I would have, Mr. Chair, would be if we have a signed contract, this would be for the attorney, and we, say for some reason we go into executive session and we decide that we want to not offer this, does that open us up for any kind of?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah,
I'm lost. We've already,
a signed contract?
we have offered him this contract. This was a negotiated contract. If we change this contract, he may not accept the offer.
Okay.
That's really where we're at.
There was a motion and a second on the floor, so if we could go with that and recess for, where I can share with you what my.
The board hasn't, to just answer the question quick before we recess, the board hasn't approved the contract yet. So we wouldn't be in a breach of contract, but as the chair pointed out, we could be in limbo with as far as we've made an offer and there's been an acceptance. And so,
Okay, I don't think where I'm going with is gonna have any effect on.
oh, wait, that's okay. I just want to answer the question before we recessed.
But I mean, I guess just, I don't want to drag this out, but if we offered, when the people that sit on the interview committee came to offer him a contract, I would think they did that with the full force of the board. I mean, ours is just kind of a perfunctory deal today to approve it. I'm just real leery on executive sessions.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I would think, without knowing the question, we don't know the answer to the question. So the only thing
Well,
we
it's-
don't want to violate a public meeting law by asking questions.
Well, it sounds like we're in a recess for a couple of minutes here. Why don't the two of you ask it, because I'm really lost where we're headed with this. All right, are we ready to reconvene?
Yes.
Okay. So unless, again, there's a motion and a second to go into executive session, we're going to move on to 7.6, but I'll make that offer. So 7.6, discussion possible action to appoint Vincent Gallegos as the Metropolitan Planning Organization Manager and approve the employment contract contingent on successful completion of the employment background check.
No discussion, motion to approve.
I will second, but I did have just a question that I wanted to ask.
Okay.
Because there were only 3 of us at that meeting, and there's some, I would like to know where we got from where we were at to the contract that we ended up with. What was it that processed? I don't remember having any discussion about the dollar amounts.
Yeah, actually, we did. I specifically remember what we said was, here's the range, and we said start at $82,000, but you have we're telling HR, you have the authority to move that up. Start at $2,500 for the moving expenses, but you have authority to move that up a little bit. And
Okay,
that's
so
what
was the
happened.
moving it up based on discussion with the individual, or was it?
Correct.
Just,
So
so there was discussion with the
So
individual?
to make sure we understand what the materiality of this is, we went from 82 to 83. We went from 2,500 to 4,000. Now, we could go back and say, well, I'm sorry, we're going to go 82 and 2,500. But he's probably going to say no, and then we're going to end up with a lot more expense trying to find somebody else.
Well, and I don't want Mr. Gallegos to even think this has anything to do with him. It has to do more with me, as we've now made an increase of a little over $10,000 from the prior individual. And from a woman's standpoint, okay, there was a woman in place before, and now there's a man in place. So I just want to go on record that I think, you know, unless there is something, and it very well could be, academically, you know, he has more academic behind him than the other individual. There could be things like that, but I just want to go on record that I think if a woman and a man are in the same position and they're doing the same job, they should get paid the same amount. So I've said it.
I don't disagree, but right now they're not both in the same position. And we're at today's market forces. So, okay, we had a motion. Is there a second?
Yes, I seconded it.
Okay. So we have a motion second to appoint Vincent Gallegos contingent on successful completion of the employment background check. Any final discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Motion passes. That was a celebratory. Future agenda items, any items from the board? Okay, the upcoming meeting schedule, we have a transportation board meeting September 15th in Tuba City. That's a ways away. TAC meeting September 19th, 2017 at 1:30. We heard earlier the bicycle pedestrian implementation plan public meeting September 19th, 2017 at 6 p.m. And next executive board meeting is to be determined, either be October or October or November. We're not sure yet. Okay, with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So made. Second.
All right, unless there's objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much. There we go, official.